Welcome to Winning on Issues, the podcast where Texas politics meets strategy and implementation. I'm your host, James Dickey, former chairman of the Republican Party of Texas. Today, we're diving into the power of principled advocacy that wins legislative victories and shapes the future of Texas. Jonathan Saenz is the president of Texas Values and Texas Values Action, two powerhouse organizations that have helped pass some of the most influential laws in Texas on religious liberty, pro-life protections, and family values. With over 2 decades of experience in law and public policy, Jonathan has become a trusted voice in the Capitol and beyond. And today, he joins us to share how he built the Texas Values organizations and their impact and what it takes to win in the legislative arena and what's still to come. Jonathan, it's great to have you. Well,
it's great to be with you. I feel like I have to say Mr. Chairman. That was your title for so long and probably during the time when we first met. But, it's good to be with a friend and someone who, likewise, you've done some great work in and around the Capitol. And so no surprise that you would host such a podcast.
Well, thank you very much. And it was absolutely my pleasure and privilege to do so. And yes, we've known each other for quite a few years. Yeah. Tell folks about what first drew you to law and public policy.
Sure. Well, like a lot of great stories and histories, it started with a pickup truck, in Texas. But, look, I was a student at the University of Texas. Had a little, Chevrolet pickup truck that I was driving around, was paid off. I was getting ready to go to law school. And honestly, I was praying for where I thought the Lord was going to lead me. I did have some interest in law and policy. I interned at the Texas Capitol. The University of Texas government program used to have a program, and they may still have something similar, where you would take a course at UT during the legislative session, and then you would, and in the coursework, you were doing a mock of it. You'd play different roles, but then you would go volunteer or intern for elected official at the Texas Capitol during the session. And so you would volunteer and you would see the real thing, and then you'd go in class and sort of play some of that out. And so I was just finishing up that work and had some ideas about going to law school, but really wanted to feel like I had a specific purpose or plan. And so nothing wrong with making money in the law, but I had some other ideas of things that maybe had a little bit more eternal value. And so I was just driving around in my pickup truck, working here and there, finishing up school, and I would hear Jay Sekulo's radio program, who was probably one of the pioneers or the first, Christian lawyers to get a lot of attention and have success at the U.S. Supreme Court on religious liberty issues. And he had a daily radio show, and he would say, we need more people going to law school that are Christians. We need to get involved in these issues. We need sort of that next generation. And so prayed about it, thought about it, and eventually just, jumped off the diving board in the deep end and said, I'm going to pursue law and policy, and I think this is where the Lord's leading me. And, over the years, I've found myself with different opportunities going back, but that's where it all started.
That's amazing. And how did you end up connecting up with First Liberty and having Texas Values born out of that?
So when I was in law school, I was very focused on the type of work I wanted to do. I did work at a large law firm. I clerked for a state court judge, Tim Taft. Also worked at Haynes & Boone, a big law firm, after my first year in law school, and then got to work at a nonprofit organization called Liberty Counsel out of the Orlando, Florida area. So very similar to Kelly Shackelford and his work early on in Texas, but this was out in Florida. And so even though I knew that's where I wanted to go, I wanted to do Christian-based law and policy, had some other opportunities to get some experience along the way. And so, every step of the way, I just kept trying to be trained. Where's the Lord leading me? What skills do I need to have when I'm going to get a little bit more professionally involved? And so I kept chasing that dream, worked for a law firm in Houston briefly out of law school, but kept looking for that opportunity. And, a friend of mine who you probably familiar with, Brian Walker, who's now a state court judge, we went to law school together, and he said, hey, I ran into Kelly Shackelford. He says he's got an opening. You should apply because I know this is the kind of work you want to do. And so I did, and I got the job. And, Kelly just kept putting me in opportunities to succeed, but make a difference. And, that's where a lot of the professional work started. And he sent me down to Austin. And when I came down to Austin, I realized that my worlds of law and policy were coming together. But a key was I felt like there was a need. There was a need for someone with my background, the law and policy, but also the appreciation for the political world, right? That right professional touch. And during that time period, James, there were a lot more attacks on our values that I don't think we realized were going to happen. And so there I was, and there was a need. And so, I just kept, working with great people along the way that knew better than I did and gave me some insight. But I just kept showing up when there was a fight and a battle, and when they needed someone to sort of do the right thing, if you will, and be a voice. And so, that was 2007, and so it's almost 20 years in this field now.
That's amazing. Well, thinking back to that, and I can absolutely relate. I had a reporter once ask me, why are Republicans so aggressive on these social issues? And my response was, are you kidding? We want to just live our life.
That's
and you
right.
guys keep attacking us and trying to change the game. It was response, not proactive things we were trying to do in the most part.
Yeah, I think that over time we saw different attacks coming from different directions where we thought, well, that shouldn't be that big of an issue, and then it would turn into a bigger issue. One of the first pieces of legislation that from beginning to end that I was a part of was just protecting Christmas in public schools, right? Being able to say Merry Christmas, give out Christmas cards, have a Christmas party, things of that nature. That issue was being litigated in the courts quite often leading up to 2013. And we decided, enough of all of this, whack-a-mole, and you've got this court case and this school district. Let's just have a statewide law. It's a constitutional issue. Supreme Court's pretty much been clear on this. We just need to put it in state law so everybody knows what the rules are to follow, and which I was really excited about being able to do. It's an issue I do care a lot about. I love Christmas, but that was one of the big first laws that I worked on from beginning to the end. There were some others before that other people brought to the table, and then I would help get across the finish line. But I remember that, and I would love to just sort of, be in a position to, have a celebration for Christmas. And I'm not saying it's an easy issue, but there was bipartisan support. So, it felt like a lot of people were in agreement. But things just moved very quickly. I mean, right after that, the 2015, the U.S. Supreme Court struck down state laws that said marriage between a man and a woman. And then we just saw things almost move quickly overnight with a lot of different attacks on values to the point of this session. We were just trying to define what is a woman. I mean, who would have thought we'd have moved this quickly? And so you're right. The issues kept coming to us, and we felt like there needs to be a response. And I don't think a law is the solution to every problem, but it certainly can make an impact. And I was taught in law school, the law is a teacher. What the law says does say something about who we are as a society and a culture. And so having something in law that's consistent, particularly when some people are trying to suggest we're not really sure what that is, or we don't really know how we can define that anymore. When there's any time some uncertainty and doubt, that was a big part of what we would do, is just come in and say, well, the courts have been clear. Let's have something consistent across the state, particularly in the school district setting. You've got over 1,200 school districts in the state of Texas, and many of them could come out there and say, well, we don't know what the law is, or we're not really sure what to do. And you've got organizations that would sometimes perpetuate that misleading thought or that confusion. And so it would seem like there was a need to have something that was consistent. And a lot of times that's what a state law can do.
Well, and that sounds like a really big lesson that you took away from that big fight. Were there any other big lessons or any other things from that shaped your approach moving forward?
Well, it's funny you say that, because I may name this person, maybe not. It might be obvious. But, I mentioned this in an event. We had our Texas Faith Fest event recently, and I got to interview the governor, and I mentioned that, it's easier to kill a bill than it is to pass a bill at the state legislature. True. A lot of people think, and listen, I encourage people, come up to the Capitol, get involved. Our office is across the street from the Capitol. I'd love to have people involved in what we do. We've got an online educational program now called Texas Values University, where we help people learn some of those things. But if you're not careful, you'll get your head cut off at the Capitol, right? And I remember that first session I worked full-time, 2007, there was a situation where Governor Perry was trying to mandate that I think sixth grade girls have the Gardasil vaccine or whatever the case was. And so it kind of got out of control. And a lot of Republicans were like, we're not going to do this. Anyway, long story short, I thought it was a very simple issue, but I had some concerns about some language in the particular bill. All I was trying to do was say, hey, I think if we word it this way, it'll be in a better position. Well, word got around, and all of a sudden I got a phone call from a very angry member of the legislature. Why are you trying to kill my bill? What do you think you're doing? I mean, I sort of knew who that legislator was. He sort of knew who I was and who Kelly Shackelford was. All he knew was that someone suggested there was a problem with his bill, and, I was the source. And so I somehow cleaned that issue up. But I learned, from that situation, and probably others, that you got to be careful what you say around the Capitol. You have to realize, too, that something like that could impact the process quite a bit. Doesn't mean you shy away from those things, but you have to realize it can be sort of a small space and group of people. And legislators usually don't like people messing with their bill, particularly if they don't think that they know what they're doing or they're not anticipating it. So sometimes what we do, having learned some of those lessons, is if we have a problem, we try to meet with that legislator ahead of time. In other words, so the first time he or she knows about it is coming directly from us, right, and not because someone else told him that, or her, that we said that. Now, sometimes things move very quickly, as you know, in the process, and you might miss the opportunity, or the window of time is so short, but that at least is our goal. And, that's a professional approach to advocacy that we try to bring to the table.
Well, and that's such a big thing. It absolutely applies in politics, but it applies in business, and it applies in the press as well. Yeah. The best thing you can do is make sure the message comes from you first, right, so you have a chance to frame it and learn from it too. Well, so those were some good lessons that you took away from that. You've had an amazing history. You just had your
speaking
faith
of,
fest.
I learned very quickly, there's nothing wrong with saying I'm sorry at the Capitol. You make mistakes sometimes, and as long as you're like, hey, I'm sorry, I apologize. Okay, now can we talk about the issue? So
absolutely,
that humility, and look, I mean, you're going to have a lot of spirited personalities at the Capitol in any type of advocacy, but sort of knowing who the people are on your side, you realize, okay, maybe I made a mistake here, or we got off on the wrong foot. But my job is to make sure you're focusing on the issue, not if you're mad at me. It's right. Not about me. It's about, let's get back to the issue. So that ability to sort of absorb things and then go, okay, now I got to make a shift because I got to get you back to talking about the really important issue.
Well, and that's literally the reason for the name of this podcast, and that's why I love the idea of talking to you about advocacy, because you have been advocating on really important issues, and you've been successful at it. What do you think have been the couple of biggest turning points for Texas values?
Well, and just a little bit of history. So I worked with Kelly Shackelford at First Liberty Institute, which at the time was Free Market Foundation, and they had a legal wing called Liberty Legal Institute. And so they were what's called a family policy council for the state of Texas. So Focus on the Family, under Dr. James Dobson's leadership, started this network of state groups, or started affiliating or working with state groups, saying, hey, we need to have some impact on state policy issues from a Christian worldview. And so it was called the Family Policy Council Network. It's now managed, if you will, or that network is through an organization called Family Policy Alliance, which was a spinoff of Focus on the Family. But the point of that is Kelly ran a state-based organization. When he sent me down to the Texas Capitol, that's the role that he was in. At one point, they decided we want to become a national organization and just focus on court cases. Kelly's got just an enormous legal background, one of the most trusted and successful First Amendment religious liberty lawyers. So they said, you know what, we're just going to focus on court cases. But now we got this young kid down in Austin, thinks he knows what he's doing. Maybe we split off that and start a new group called Texas Values, where we just do state-based work. But it freed me up, because not only am I just working on court cases and a lot of policy, we then were able to start a 501c4 where we could do endorsements, we could do voters guides, we could sort of widen, open things up a little bit, which you can appreciate. A lot of this work is based on a 2-year cycle, right? Yeah. You could have a great law that you pass, but then if that legislator that passed that law gets targeted in an election and loses their election, you might come back the next session and now your bill or the law you just passed is in jeopardy because somebody's trying to take it over. So you realize, okay, I got to work on coming up with the idea, getting the law passed, and then if I have these other opportunities, these other tools out of the toolbox, I get into that equation of I'm going to educate you about what the law is in the fall. Then we get into late fall, early March, early, of the next year, of the even number year, and you got primary elections, and then you got the general elections. And so there's this 2-year cycle that much of our work is on. We want to have a role in all of those to make sure that that policy sticks around. But so 2012, we started Texas Values. Kelly Shackelford is on the board. I told him, I said, I'll do this, but you've got to be on my board because I don't want people to think we got in a fight and there was some kind of split up, and that they could see some consistency. And that was the case. And so once Texas Value started, I think that allowed us to think about what are we going to focus on more so, and what are the tools that we have in the toolbox to do that. And so I do think during that time period, you saw the court case of Obergefell, the same-sex marriage case. You saw more attacks on religious liberty. You saw the mayor of Houston passing, the original bathroom ordinance, which said that private businesses had to allow men into those women's bathrooms. So you saw some at the local level too of the shifting, and you saw new people coming up like Ted Cruz and other elected officials responding to maybe we need some more values-based people in leadership and in these different roles. And so as these things were coming together, we were taking a look at, let's make sure we can play, if you will, or be involved in these different arenas, the courts, the legislature, the media, the politics, because they can all be very relevant to the outcome of a law and policy or a solution to a problem.
They absolutely can. And one of the things we're focusing on here on Winning on Issues is how we can get legislative wins.
Yeah.
And as you and I both know, we've been around for a while. There are a lot of ways to, like you said, there's a lot of ways to kill a bill, and there's a lot of ways to get something wrong. But Texas Values, you guys were very instrumental in getting some really important bills done. Highlight a couple of those and tell us about what was important to you in those fights, how you were able to do it.
Well, and what I saw over probably 4 to 6 years was us having a role. And religious liberty was probably one of the areas where we were naturally leading more on in the beginning, but there were other organizations and other leaders and players, if you will. But over the 4 to 6 years, if not 8 years, it moved from, okay, we're a part of a coalition of groups to, now we're the lead and people are sort of following our direction, which I appreciate being able to be in that role, but I also appreciate having something to bring to the table to know, okay, we know how to get things done. There's a sort of pathway and some different rules, if you will, that you should follow that get you in a better position for success. But it didn't come instantly. I might have thought that I knew some things early on, but was anyone going to follow me, right? Did we have a track record of success? Because that's where it starts with. I mean, you can talk all the time about how important your organization is, but if you don't have any evidence that you actually got legislation done, that it got to the governor's desk and that the governor signed it, it's hard to make that much of a case, right? Yep. And so I think, we, in the beginning, okay, what is our role? How can we participate? And I mentioned the Christmas bill, but I remember that same session, there was a huge pro-life piece of legislation. By number, it was called HB2. It had a number of different aspects to it, but it related to health and regulations on abortion clinics. Think about that. In 2013, 12 years ago, we were talking about just making sure there are regulations for abortion clinics. Now we've moved with the Texas Heartbeat Law and other great laws that abortion is almost not happening at all in the state of Texas. Matter of fact, this week, the big Planned Parenthood clinic in Houston announced they were closing their doors, right? The 6-7-story building. But that was a big piece of legislation. Mike Huckabee was at the Capitol. The left, the pro-abortion crowd just about shut down the Capitol. It was on lockdown. It was a crazy atmosphere. But I remember the Duggars were there. I mean, it was just like this huge thing that blew up. But I remember that I was able to speak. As a matter of fact, I do believe that was the moment where Senator Ted Cruz, somebody from his staff said, hey, he can't make it to this event. He would like for you to deliver his speech, which is always kind of nice, right? You're like, I don't have to write anything. Awesome. Somebody smart in a U.S. Senator's office wrote a speech. Everything you say, they're going to love, right? But I remembered that, being in those positions, right? I was just there. What can I do to help? And all of a sudden, they needed somebody to step up and lead and somebody that they would trust. But having that access to a microphone and realizing the press, the rallies, the social media, the traditional media, all of those things can have a huge impact on you getting your legislation done. You can make the argument all day at the state capitol, but you've got the public and all these other spheres where you're losing the battle. You could really be in trouble. And so I think I did not do speech and debate. I didn't learn public speaking when I was in high school, even in undergrad. I don't think it was until I got to law school and did mock trial and some other things that I realized I need to know what to say and how to approach things when I stand in front of a microphone, because it can be one of the most powerful places. So we decided, and we say this all the time, government belongs to those who show up. So wherever Christian values, conservative values, family values, when they've been challenged, we're like, we need to go there. We need to show up. What's our role going to be? It may be different depending on the circumstances, but we need to be there. We need to be visible. We need to be there ready to help. And the more that we did that, people were saying, we like what you have to say. We think that you're relevant to this equation. We're glad that you're a team player. I was not a speaker that day at that event, right. That rally at the state capitol in 2013. I was just there because we cared and our organization wanted to have a presence. And they were like, Ted Cruz can't make it. Jonathan Saenz, here, will you deliver this speech? So those things happen sometimes. But it started with wherever these issues come up and they're challenged, we need to be there to push back or to have a way to counter what the other side is saying.
Well, and you're right. You build those tight relationships in the foxholes when you're fighting together.
I don't think it hurt that I think we might have endorsed Senator Cruz when he ran that cycle too, but that helps. Those things can play together.
Absolutely. Well, and this session, there were some really important things that were right in your lane, but you and your team were also involved in other big issues that mattered and weren't misaligned. They just weren't necessarily like school choice. You guys were absolutely supportive, given the positive things that can come from something like that.
Yeah, there's no doubt. I mean, like I mentioned, we worked a lot on religious liberty at the beginning in other areas too, but we probably were relied on a little bit more with our history with Shackelford, with some court cases at the U.S. Supreme Court that we were a part of when I was working with Kelly, but we realized there were some other big issues that we could help on as well. And I remember in 2021, that was the year that Texas passed the Texas heartbeat law, but it was tried in 2019. I believe Briscoe Cain filed it then. Whatever the case may be, it didn't really go anywhere. There wasn't an opportunity. People were looking at other issues. But I remember that, and leading up to 2021, we thought this might be the time. Maybe Trump was going to put some new people on the Supreme Court. There was just some elements, and the culture was starting to move. We had passed some other strong pro-life laws leading up to that. The sonogram bill, 15-week restriction, some of those things. And we thought maybe this is the time to step a little bit further and to go with something stronger. And I remember we had a conversation with Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick. And it wasn't clear that anybody was going to sort of step up and take the baton. There were other pro-life bills, but he was really interested in the heartbeat law, and so were we. And so we talked and we said, listen, I know there are other pro-life groups, and they're great, but so are we. And maybe we need to lead on this issue this time, and let's get our friends to follow us. And we did. We passed some great religious liberty laws that session, including laws that made it clear the government can never close a church for any reason. But we were growing as a team. We were growing as far as our network, our grassroots network. And we said, let's go after this issue. I was the head of my pro-life group in law school. As a matter of fact, I sued my university to protect the free speech rights of the pro-life group I was leading at the University of Houston, and we won. So I'd always been pro-life, but there were a lot of pro-life groups, and so we're like, okay, we'll help with some of that, but maybe we're not needed quite as much. But we were then, and I remember that was a huge turning point, even though we had established ourselves quite a bit, but to carry that bill, and we did, and we got other people on board, but I think that, our trust and relationship with the Lieutenant Governor, which had already been strong, grew even more. Right. And amongst other organizations to know, okay, they're team players. We can count on them. But man, they can get something across the finish line. And you better know what you're doing. You get in those last 2 weeks of May, it's cutthroat. Everybody's trying to pass their bill. They're running out of time. And honestly, James, you've probably seen this. People just flat out give up and go home. Mm-hmm. And I don't blame them. In other words, I get it. Because this process, particularly the state capitol, can break your heart, right? Several times by name, legislators from the left, Democrats, have called us out and basically said, we're killing this bill because we don't like Texas values, or we don't like these these organizations. We don't like Jonathan Saenz, right? It can get very personal. But that 2021 was a turning point. And so when we got to this session, it put us in a position to think about some bigger things. Some of that was unfinished business. I don't like to relive the 2017 legislative session any more than I have to for certain reasons. But that was when we got our head handed to us on the Texas women's privacy issue. Was sort of a new issue, but had come out of the city of Houston, been clear that this was sort of an emerging, battlefield with these different issues. But the public was still trying to figure out what it meant and what it amounted to and how it would look in policy. But the lieutenant governor put a bill out there. We told him we had his back, and it didn't get done. Primarily because Joe Strauss, who was the leader at that time, was the Speaker of the House. I've never seen this happen before, and not since then. He, on his own, the Speaker had a press conference by himself in front of the podium, nobody else with him, and said, the Texas Women's Privacy Act, I don't think they called it women, it was just called Texas Privacy Act, is dead. He said the bill's dead. I mean, he killed it himself, right? And so we get to this session, and we feel like this is the time to get it done. But we knew enormous undertaking, and we didn't get it done in the regular session. It had to get to the second special session. But guess who was on board? The governor, right? Not only did you have the Speaker giving a speech, okay? And take a look at that for a second. You go from 2017 to the Speaker of the House, who says he was Republican, saying that bill's dead, I'm killing it, basically, to now, you look at 8 years later, Dustin Burrows saying it's a priority to pass. I'm going to make sure it passed. The governor talking about the lieutenant governor. And so, but we had a lot of great people come to the table and talk about the issue. It is sort of, there had been more conflicts and more examples of why it was a problem. I wish we didn't have to go through those, but it did allow the case to be made a lot stronger. But along the way, people knew that's an issue we work on, that we were we were in school district after school district, Dripping Springs, Round Rock, all across the state where we were involved in these issues, South Lake Carroll. So we'd established those relationships. All of that comes together, and we're like, all these people, we're coming together, we're putting it all on this issue. And, it doesn't upset me that it took 2 special sessions to get it done. I'm just so glad that it did get done. But all of those things did come together because this was probably one of the heaviest lifts, one of the biggest pieces of legislation that we've been able to pass. And, I'm happy to say, it took more than just us to get it done.
Absolutely. And it took more than one session to get it done.
Yeah.
And even with the governor's support and the speaker's
is that
support,
unusual,
it still
James?
took more.
Right?
Not
for the
at
rookies
all.
out there.
Yeah.
Why did my bill get past the first session? I need to vote somebody out.
Well, and
let me tell you, son.
Exactly. And I talk to folks, as a rule, we don't care for gradual approach.
Yeah.
But in Texas legislature, our amazing Second Amendment improvements have all come one step at a time. Our amazing pro-life improvements have all come one step at a time. It is the nature of the beast.
One thing we haven't talked about yet, at least from a lot of the work we do, the part that the Republican Party of Texas and the platform and the legislative priorities issues that I think they were there before, but I think it's become, more of a factor in this equation. You brought a lot of that to the table. I believe you testified in favor of the Texas Privacy Act in 2017 to have the chairman of the Republican Party there, right? So we see a lot of that movement and relevance and those things playing out in the legislative process. So we see that. You've got to get on the platform committee. You've got to get on the priorities list. All those things can be a part of it. It doesn't mean if you don't have those things, you can't get legislation done. But particularly it's going to be something statewide. I don't know why. I sort of know why, but a lot of our issues do play out that way. They get a little bit more attention, and they tend to be a little bit deeper or foundational, which means the other side tends to focus a lot more on killing those type of things or defeating them. But we started to notice that as well, right? To where we're like, if you show up in January trying to get a bill passed, boy, that's going to be really tough, right? You've missed certain pieces of, certain phases of this process. But I didn't know that in 2007 with the first session I came down. I got lucky. Some of the stuff I helped pass, other people actually did a lot of hard work, and I did some pushing and helped some of those things get across the finish line. But being able to see the full picture. Now, if you can get something past the first session, great. Don't think you can't. Come with the perspective that it's so important that it must get done then. But If it doesn't, don't burn all your bridges down because you're upset. And then you start the next session with nothing. If not, set yourself back. So you have to, you have to have some expectation that, a lot of things don't get done the first time. If you're fortunate, they do, great. Maybe you should have passed a stronger bill, whatever the case may be. But maybe you can get some other things done. But realize that some of that is people getting aware of the issue and it increasing in importance. Yeah. But I do think that I see that a lot where people, and some of that is, okay, I'm going to get somebody out of office. Well, okay, that might be a part of the equation. It depends on who that person is or if they have a leadership position. But it might just be, and I tell our team all the time, we have to first start with, have we done our job of making the argument? Because it just may be that you're not doing a good enough job of making the argument that this issue is important and it needs a solution. Absolutely.
At the end of the day, you need enough legislators to realize that an issue is a law is the right way to approach an important issue, which means they have to realize it's important and they have to realize that your approach is right.
It doesn't hurt to have a scorecard either, though.
It does not.
To let them know you mean business, but.
Well, and you guys have absolutely rolled out all of the weapons, all of the tools that are necessary to be effective, and that's undoubtedly part of why you guys have been so effective at Texas Values and Texas Values Action. Thank you so much for joining us today. This has been a real pleasure, and wish you all the best in future sessions.
Yeah, well, look, and a lot of the playbook is there. Texas Values University is an online educational platform. We just rolled out phase 1. We're going to be doing more phases. It has subject matter content, but it also has strategies and skills. Some of my secrets that I picked up over the year, my expertise, tricks to the trade, whatever, however you want to frame that. But we realized that we've learned a lot. We'd love to pass it on to other people. And we'd love to see people, try to do things the right way, or at least a way that we think is more likely for you to have success and is done in a principle and a Christian way. And that's really important to us.
Couldn't have said it better.
Right, so
thank you very much.